Thank you, Utah.js, for having me here. I'm really excited to be here today. How is everyone doing? Are you enjoying the conference so far? Yeah? This is it. This is the last talk of the day, and you guys are it. So thank you. This is me. I'm Courtney McCleve, and I'm a JavaScript engineer at Canopy Tax. We are currently hiring, so please come and apply. So I'd like to clear the air first. First and foremost, I'm not here to discourage from having standards and setting bars on code coverage. If your business is a large business and has a capacity or needs to enforce that protocol, I think that's the best way to go about it. For me, I've worked mostly at startups, and we haven't had that luxury. So I'm going to ask everyone in the room to pretend really hard with me and be this pink flamingo, so that in the process, we may all find balance. Take it. Hello. Okay. I'm going to show you a couple of different shapes for the next couple of slides. For most of you in this room, you're probably familiar with this shape. This is the testing pyramid, if you don't know. So the testing pyramid has 3 tiers. Each layer is proportional to how much of each type of test you should write to maximize business value. So we have the unit test at the bottom, which is a test that focuses on testing only logic. So it mocks everything else around it. And then we have our integration test, which is 2 or more UI components or services that talk to each other and testing that relationship between the objects. Last but not least, we have our E2E, or end-to-end test. This is a very special type of test as it's an extensive test. We'll get more about the details in just a couple of seconds. For now, think of it as client-user interaction, all the way into insertion of data into the database and everything in between. As you go up the pyramid, mocking is discouraged, becomes less and less. So why is end-to-end testing at the top? Well, end-to-end requires a browser to be spun up and then a WebDriver to go and use that browser and simulate click events or user interactions. So that way it gets propagated to the server and to the database and then back, which is why it's called an end-to-end test. If your app is sophisticated, you might require a login to be done first before you can even start testing. And of course, this is not free. Oops. My bad. This model is pretty typical. So if you're paying attention, then you saw this slide. I want you all to think about some of the challenges and problems this testing strategy might have. And can you see where this model might make sense at a business? Okay, so I've worked at a company with just 3 developers and half a QA. And we maintained a very complicated product. Imagine marketplace for product that could be resold and distributed by other distributors, which also require different sets of commission and net rates, and plus it was over state lines, so you have taxes to think about. Oh, and we auto-generated websites. Oh, and it was written in AngularJS. No one? Okay, fine. Okay. So how do we prevent things from breaking? Well, we all played our part in writing testing documentation, and the decision was made to only write end-to-end tests, as our application was written without any testing prior. So we needed a high degree of confidence quickly, kind of relatively speaking. We need confidence that our critical paths in our application would not break. So it made sense to use the end-to-end test type. If you are familiar with testing and you're in the industry, you may have seen this shape. This is the testing trophy. As you can see, there's a new layer here. It's static. What static it does is before a developer even commits their code, we're running static code analysis on your code to check for like nulls, if the data model matches, uncalled functions, all of that. So it helps reduce the need for some unit tests. As you can see, unit tests got smaller. But why have integration tests, or why have the integration layer gotten bigger? Well, as I mentioned before, UI elements in a web application rarely are independent. The only independent one I can think of is an anchor tag. You click on it, you navigate, done. No testing required, it's independent. But a form, a button, they always are with another element. So, okay. The integration and unit tests, they're quick to run on your machine. You can run them locally and before you even commit. So they're quick to run. So that saves you a lot of time. They don't require server resources to spin up, so they're cost effective too. Sorry. Okay. So, and if you are really into testing, you may have seen this shape, but most likely you haven't. This is the fractal pyramid. It was coined by a man named Gleb Bamutov, and he's VP of Engineering at Cypress.io. He's a very smart man and knows what he's doing. However, have you noticed we are missing a layer here? I'm not going to dive too much into the layer, into what this pyramid means, but why is the integration layer missing? Well, integration, you're simulating if you're not simulating the client experience, you can call it a type of unit test if you're focused with that type of test. So it kind of gets absorbed by the unit. And I like this model because it simplifies things. So you don't have to be picky. Is that an integration test or a unit or end-to-end? It's black or white, end-to-end or unit. So I appreciate how he's making a complicated concept more simple, more straightforward, if you will. Okay, so why do we write test cases? Is it to increase test coverage? Is that simply it, to increase test coverage? Or is it to help developers and engineers find bugs quickly and fix them quickly? So, as I was saying before, with the upside down pyramid, all we wrote was end-to-end tests. When we write end-to-end tests, it gives us a high degree of confidence, but we don't know what broke. Like if an end-to-end test breaks, it hits on many different critical paths. What broke? Why did it broke? Why didn't the element show up? This is something that an end-to-end test will not show, but a unit and an integration test, they would, because they cover more the visibility side. So, one thing is certain, if you're heavy in one layer of a strategy and not in another, visibility and or competence will suffer. So test cases do not provide business value. Finding and fixing bugs does. Okay. So what is my goal? I think you know that I am advocate for a balanced test suite. But what is my goal? In my experience, I've worked at lots of places, and I've been in the automation test initiative. And one thing I've noticed not done so well is executing an end-to-end test suite. So I've come here today to share with you my findings. I've created a checklist of what I believe to be the most important parts of a successful end-to-end system. I hope that you all might find something by the end of this talk. So I want to be very clear. I talk a lot about end-to-end, but it doesn't mean that I want everybody to be reaching for the end-to-end test tool first. I am actually advocating against that. I say reach for the end-to-end test tool when it makes the most sense. So, for instance, is your UI changing a lot? Is it subject to change? Is it volatile? Is it changing a lot? If so, stay away from the end-to-end test. Save your money, save your time, and stay away. Okay, so what else? Does it span like multiple pages, or is it complicated? Something that unit and integration tests absolutely cannot fill. So once you've exhausted all your resources, that is when I believe you should reach for an end-to-end test. And of course, you should always, as long as it's not changing, test your critical paths, the paths that make money, the happy paths, what have you. So test the right things. Another thing, to write a successful end-to-end test, we need to simulate prod as close as possible without actually being prod. So you need your own resources and server. So some organizations will actually test their end-to-end on stage or QA or dev, what have you. However, this might result in false positives, as there's a lot of data being used on these environments because other developers, QAs, are using this environment. So it could result in false positives. Alternatively, you could use a Docker container and contain your application in order to run an end-to-end test suite locally and virtually. Goes without saying, to simulate prod, you want very minimal mocking, and you want it to be able to simulate client paths, so you want it to run on different browsers. Is this slide unfinished? I'm not sure, just kidding. I point this out because reliability is one of the things that companies struggle the most with when creating an end-to-end test suite. Back in the day, we had Selenium, and Selenium struggled a lot with single-page applications or dynamic elements. So the result was you'd see weights littered all over the code base, which would cause developers just headaches trying to reason about all these weights, when to write them, how long is too long to wait before it's an actual problem. Do I write a weight now or no? So then enter Test Cafe and Cypress. These two technologies have done a lot, have made strides in terms of making sure to be, making end-to-end test suites reliable. Cypress integrates with the Chromium WebDriver, and so it's built in an extremely stable tool to simulate client user clicks, types. It's done a really good job with it, and it has a lot of really cool, neat features. I chose Test Cafe, which Test Cafe has approached the problem in a little bit differently. Instead of using a WebDriver at all, they're actually using a URL proxy to take your code and then execute commands on your browser, which is pretty cool. Did I duplicate this slide? No. I think there's more that we can do in terms of reliability other than what tools we check. So we can do more to promote reliability by controlling what data goes into the database, assuming you're using like a Docker container. That way, you can have controlled input, so standard data. So ideally, you'd have an end-to-end test fixture per data, per like a data set in your database. And then after your test fixture, you would clean up your side effects, so that way the next test could run and have pristine data. This sounds pretty cool, right? Well, I'm going to demo it. Okay, I do expect this to not work. I did expect this. Okay, so we have two databases. We have facts and we have facts pristine. Looks like everything's broken, and I totally agree. So what we're going to do is we're going to initialize our Docker container. And so that way our code can run. So now we should be able to see, eventually, data. Great. Now that we know it's loading. So as I said before, I chose Test Cafe. This is our Bootstrap file. And I've got the different type of browsers here specified in the runner configuration here. So I'm going to just go ahead and run this, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it's doing afterwards. Okay, I'm just not going to look. I don't want to know if this failed or not. So let me know. Kind of looking at it, but that's okay. Maybe it's better. Okay, so we've hit my breakpoint. Our test passed. Okay, the live coding. It's not even live coding. Live demo. Okay, that's a success. As you can see, in our facts database, we've got the React Vue and Angular code here, or the data that was created from our end-to-end test. So now I'm going to run this bash script to seed the data. So now it's going to dump our pristine database into our database that we use to run our tests on. And as you can see, it's been cleaned up. All right, cool, cool. Oh, okay. So now we can go back into our presentation. What's going on here? So we have two databases. We have our pristine database, and we have our clone database. So B is a clone of A. We run our tests on B. And then once our tests are done, we'll seed A back into B. So that's essentially what's going on, all from within a Docker container. I've provided this slide to show you what I think my solution checks off. And I think if there's no check mark next to it, it either didn't hit that criteria or it wasn't applicable, as it's a contrived example. So this is what we've got. Okay. I'm also an organizer for devs with disabilities, and our goals are this. The first goal is to foster a community where disabled or handicapped people can come and be in a community that's safe for them to learn how to be a developer. And goal 2 is to learn about accessibility and technologies promoting a more accessible, friendlier web. Our first meetup is Monday, September 23rd, this upcoming Monday, at Canopy Tax in Lehigh. At 7. Okay. Thank you.